Hey guys, how's it going? So there are innumerable figures in myth and history that have the potential to be added into FGO at some point in the future. Figures that range from mighty gods to impish puppets, the possibilities are endless. So today, for our continuation of the prediction series, I wanted to pose a challenge to myself. Today's predictive servants are not human in origin. Instead, I want to look at the figures and heroes that appear in our myths and legends that are both primal and mechanic. This is not a new concept in FGO, with servants such as Lobo, Freyne, and Galatea being represented despite their origins, but we don't have enough of them. So strap in for an inhuman episode of Predicting Fate Servants. I'm going to make my life a whole lot easier this time by not limiting myself to one per class. Instead, we're going to introduce the character, theory crafter, class, and kit, and move on nice and easy. So with that said, Leica is my first pick and personal choice for Grand Rider. And don't give me any of this Noah nonsense either, because you and I both know that his ass is not escaping arcade anyway. While I'm sure most of you know of Leica to a degree, here is her history in brief. Leica was a stray dog from the streets of Moscow. The Russian government was desperate to get a leg up on the United States during the space race, and after the wildly successful launch of the Sputnik, Soviet leaders demanded that their scientists do something even greater by the 40th anniversary of the October Revolution. In other words, they had 1 month to meet Khrushchev's demands. They had to construct an entirely new satellite for the occasion in the allotted time, and to wow the world, they wanted to put the first dog into orbital space. Note that they had launched other dogs into space before Leica, but having one in direct orbit had never been done before, so the scientists scooped up Leica from the streets 1 week before the mission. The reason for picking strays was because no one would miss a random stray dog, but they had also proven to survive the harsh Russian winters without proper shelter, so they were likely very robust. Leica actually was not her original name used by the Soviets, but rather Kudrevka, which I just absolutely butchered, sorry Kriv, which translates to Little Curly, or as she was called stateside, Curly. She would get the nickname Leica from the fact that she would bark a lot, and the Russian word for bark is layat. She was quickly trained to live in small enclosures, which affected her toilet patterns negatively, put her through the centrifugal force tests, and taught her to eat a high-density gel for nourishment. Soon before the launch of Sputnik 2, she was taken home by a scientist to play with his children. He is quoted in remarking of how kind and playful that she was, and that he wanted to do something nice for her as she had little time left. On Halloween of 1957, she was placed into the shuttle to get used to her final environment. She would be there until November 3rd, when the scientists would shower her with love before sending her into the Great Void. The rocket launched with Leica's vitals being carefully monitored. Initially, Leica had a spike in her heart rate activity, and a failure of detachment and thermal issues raised the internal temperature to 40 degrees Celsius or 104 degrees Fahrenheit. But over time, her heart rate would stabilize. She was put successfully into orbit and was the first dog to achieve such a feat. Despite the stress, it was indicated that she did in fact eat when she became hungry, but somewhere around the 5 to 7 mark, all signs of vital life vanished, and Leica was declared dead. There was no procedure set to reclaim the body of the dog, and she, along with Sputnik 2, burnt up in the atmosphere upon re-entry. Originally, the team had planned to euthanize her with poisoned food to quickly and mercilessly put her down, but as of 2002, we know that she actually died of overheating by the 4th circuit in orbit. It was stated that it was simply impossible to create a thermally stable craft with the time constraints given. Leica's story would later open the doors for discussion on the ethical treatment of animals in the pursuit of science, and her story is equally amazing and tragic. How much valuable information was gathered by putting a dog into space so that it could die? Well, the answer, quite frankly, is not enough to justify it. We were aware by this point that it was possible to survive being in orbit if the technology was sophisticated enough. If this plan had included a potential retrieval that accidentally led to Leica's death, then at the very least scientists could learn and theorize more ways to do so safely, but that wasn't the case. Leica is a personal favorite footnote in history for me, and is one I think would be a joy to see added. As for a class, I already said Grand Rider, but Rider in general just seems like the obvious one. You could maybe do a foreigner thing there if you want to be really fun with it. If you want to be really fancy though with your theory crafting, you could make her a caster because of her exposure to science and claim that she learned rocket science while in the care of the cosmonauts. I would prefer if she just stayed a dog who rides the Sputnik craft and was friends with Voyager, but you and I both know that they would make her into a dog girl or something in an astronaut outfit. Regardless, this is my new Don Quixote, please lasagna, I am begging you here. Well, that was long-winded. Next up is Pinocchio, and not any of this nonsense. That one's actually really good, go watch it. I mean the 19th century fairy tale Pinocchio. The original Pinocchio was not this happy, got no strings dancing chap. I'll brief the OG story here. Pinocchio was originally a talking log destined to become a table leg, but the woodsman who found him didn't like the fact that he could talk, so he gave the log to his poor neighbor Geppetto. Geppetto made the log into a puppet who immediately started trying to kick the puppet maker. Once he was finished, Pinocchio stole Geppetto's Geppetto's wig and fled from the house. A policeman saw what he believed to be a child running from an old man's house and assumed that Geppetto had been up to mischief, to put into some PG terms, so he went on to arrest him. Pinocchio returned later and was hungry, so he went to cook something to eat, and a talking cricket told him that being disobedient would lead him to harm. In response, Pinocchio threw a hammer at the cricket, which killed it. He would later go visit a neighbor who thought the puppet was pulling a prank on him, so he threw water on him. And to dry off, Pinocchio slept on the stove where his legs burnt off. Luckily, Geppetto was released due to the lack of evidence and made Pinocchio new legs. I think you already get the idea of how this version is different from the Disney one. Here are some of these standout moments that set this one apart, so I'm not just reading an entire tale to you. Pinocchio gets lynched with graphic detail describing the incident, even how his body goes limp. He is saved by a fairy, who then dies. The ghost of the cricket keeps showing up to help him, but he's always ignored. The fairy comes back to life as his mother and promises to make him a real boy if he gets good grades. He does so well in school that he's called a nerd, and so he assaults his classmates. He falls over onto his head, which makes a snake laugh so hard it bursts a blood vessel in his head and he dies. He is one day away from becoming a real boy when he and his best friend go to the Island of Toys for 5 months. This is where he and his buddy become donkeys and are sold off to be work animals. Pinocchio is sold to a circus and trained to do tricks, but breaks a leg after seeing the fairy in the audience. He's then sold off to be killed and turned into a drum and thrown into the ocean to drown, but instead fish just eat the donkey parts off of him and he becomes a puppet again. He finds his best friend, who is still a donkey but has been overworked, and dies soon after. He saves Geppetto from a mile-long shark and gives all of his money to a snail to save the life of the fairy. She then turns him into a real boy and he's no longer a dickhead. Oh, also when he lies, his nose grows, and to fix that, the fairy calls upon a woodpecker to cut off the excess. That's a lot of insanity that should be expected from a fairy tale. Pinocchio is not supposed to be a likable character. You're meant to hate him for being a supreme idiot until the very end, when he is redeemed. He would be a perfect addition to Chaldea as a lancer class, using his nose as a spear to defeat his enemies or something. There are a lot of interpretations of his story to draw on as well, so I see him as a real possibility in the future, maybe as a Halloween event. Next up is a bit of a mysterious figure that could still potentially exist today, the Golem of Prague, or for simplicity's sake, the Golem. The Golem was, as you may have figured out, a golem, which is a creature that exists in Jewish mysticism. Generally constructed from either mud or horse dung, golems could be created to perform certain tasks for powerful mystics through the power of divine words. The Golem of Prague was said to be created by Rabbi Loew in the 16th century to protect the Jewish people from anti-Semitic pogroms and riots, as it was very common at the time, and still is, to use the Jews as scapegoats for problems that are occurring. So, Rabbi Loew took mud from a nearby river and formed them into a golem, put a clay tablet into its mouth with the word Shem, which brought it to life. It was made in the shape of a bulky man with a great belt and enormous glowing eyes, and given a very simple task: protect the Jewish people of Prague. And so it was. The golem supposedly would protect the Jews of Prague from those that would come to try and harm them, and on every Friday, Rabbi Loew would deactivate the golem by removing the tablet from its mouth so that the golem may rest on Saturdays, the Jewish Sabbath. That is, until one day when the rabbi forgot to deactivate the creature. Legend has it that Rabbi Loew was reciting Psalm 92 when someone burst into the synagogue and told him that the golem was going on a murderous rampage. Rabbi Loew immediately went and confronted his creation, and he managed to snatch the tablet from its mouth, which caused the golem to fall into pieces. He then collected the pieces and stored them in the attic of the synagogue and instructed that no one ever go there except for his successors. To this day, there are very few people who've gone to see the remains of the golem. There are 2 famous accounts of people who are not successors attempting to see the remains. One was a journalist who looked inside and found nothing at all. The other was a Nazi who looked inside and claimed to see nothing, but then mysteriously died soon after. Rumors claim that the remains were taken away and buried, or taken and stored somewhere safer. Regardless, I would love to see what this golem would look like in-game. We already have a resident golem master in FGO in Avispron, so seeing him interact with what I'm going to assume is a berserker golem that is somewhat sentient would be a treat. They could even have it have the soul of Rabbi Loew occupy the golem, and the pair could be companions. Regardless, a new golem would be grand. Moving from Prague to Poland, we have Vojtek, the bear that was a corporal in the Polish military. The Polish army was leaving the Soviet Union and moving to Iran with some thousands of Polish civilians when they encountered an Iranian boy with a bear cub. The boy claimed that the mother bear had been killed by hunters, and a Polish teen asked a military officer if they could keep it. The bear was purchased and later donated to the 2nd Transport Company of the military, where he would spend 3 months in a refugee camp and receive the name Vojtek, which loosely means happy warrior. As he was just a cub, he needed milk to grow, and was fed condensed milk from a vodka bottle, as is the Polish tradition. He would also be fed fruits and honey, as well as jam, marmalade, and beer if he had been good that day, as is also the Polish tradition. He enjoyed chewing on a good cigarette and a nice cup of coffee in the mornings, and was taught to salute like any good soldier. He was well loved by those around him and very playful, often wrestling with the soldiers and sometimes even sleeping with them. Apparently, he served as a great living heater for the cold nights and was tame enough that he wouldn't harm his bedmates. He became something of a mascot for the troop and was part of the campaigns through Iran, Syria, and Egypt. He grew up quickly and copied the actions of the soldiers, learning to both drink beer from the bottle and march on his hind legs. Wojtek would officially be drafted into the Polish military and given the rank of private after the 22nd Artillery Supply was told that they would be fighting alongside the British on the Italian war front. However, the British forbade mascots and pets on their transport ships, so the Polish made him an official member of the battalion, which I guess the British were just like, alright, checks out, he's got the paperwork. As an official soldier, he was given a proper paybook, officer rank and serial number, and living assignments alongside his comrades in arms. It was during the Battle of Mont Cassino that Wojtek would make a real name for himself. While accounts are somewhat spotty, there are eyewitness accounts by non-Polish soldiers seeing a bear lumbering by carrying ammo crates. That's right, Wojtek, who had mimicked humans his whole life, was now mimicking them to assist in the war cause. Supposedly, he followed after his companions while carrying 4 times the weight a normal soldier could, and he was able to stack the crates onto trucks for transport. For his great assistance, he was promoted to corporal, and an image of a bear carrying ammo was made the official emblem of the 22nd Transport. After the war, Wojtek would be moved to Scotland. This is largely because Poland was currently occupied by the Soviets, and the Poles were actively trying to rid themselves of communism. The last thing they wanted was to give the Reds a fluffy figurehead for their movement, or worse, execute him. So instead, he settled in a small town near Edinburgh, where he learned to play soccer with children. Due to the concerns of him being a bear, he would eventually be moved to the Edinburgh Zoo, where he would live out the rest of his life, taking BBC interviews and being given cigarettes by soldiers, which he actually learned how to puff before eating. He would die in 1963 from esophagus problems, likely because of his cigarette habit. While this whole story may sound like a gritty reboot of Air Bud that flew under the radar, I am happy to report to you that this is all real. I would reckon with a story like that, he's made a mark on history, and a positive one at that. His story is comical and fanciful, but almost shows the human side of something seen usually as a symbol of barbaric nature. I would love to see him added as a servant, maybe an archer class. In all honesty, he would 100% be a support character, and maybe one who hangs out with Konyanskayev Light. In fact, that just lines itself up as a perfect event and gets Wada Arco to draw a smoking bear carrying huge ammo shells, and boom, it's perfect. Finally, we have Gellert. Loyalty is a trait often ascribed to dogs, even to the point that they are referred to as man's best friend. Often when you hear a dog's loyalty to their master, the go-to story is that of the famed Shiba Hachiko. However, I wish to tell a different story. The tale is Welsh in origins and tells of Elwyn the Great, a prince of the region who had a John named Gellert. The prince had a baby boy who he left alone one day with Gellert while he went out hunting. When he returned from the hunt, Gellert happily jumped upon him. He noticed his wolfhound's maw was smeared with blood, as was the floor and furniture. He then went to check his son's crib and he found it empty and stained with blood. Discovering the death of his child, the prince drew his sword and killed Gellert, who let out a yelp and fell over dead. Then came the sound of a crying baby. Under the crib was the prince's son, and next to him, the corpse of a wolf that had been killed by Gellert. While the prince had been out hunting, a wolf had snuck in to try and eat the child, and the blood along Gellert's maw was that of the wolf's. With a great amount of regret in his heart, Elwyn buried the dog, but is said to have never smiled again. Gellert is a tragic animal, one that did nothing wrong and everything right, yet was still killed by his owner. You can find Gellert's grave today, 800 years later, in the town of Bedgellert, in a small mound with a plaque recounting the tale of the hound. By the way, that town is not named after the dog, that's just coincidental. I love this story despite its tragedy, and I would love to see Gellert make an appearance in-game. As with Leica, I would prefer if Gellert arrived as an actual dog, but given how fate is, well, fate, I assume they will anthropomorphize him. Despite being a figure of tragedy, I don't see Gellert as being an avenger. I say this because the hound, while betrayed by his master, had an undying loyalty to him. If Gellert could take down what was described as a mighty wolf on his own, he could have avoided being stabbed by that sword. As such, I am almost inclined to believe that he accepted his fate to a degree, and I could see fate playing onto that angle as well. For class, I would wager Gellert could arrive as an assassin or lancer class. Assassin because of his killing of the wolf, and lancer as a distasteful pun on the fact that he was killed by a sword and had awful luck. Regardless, I will say it again that we need more dog servants in this game. So that is some predictions or free ideas for future servants for Fate Grand Order. If you want me to keep making more videos like this one, let me know down in the comments. Do all the YouTube stuff to stay up to date with all the content coming down the pipeline. Check below for the links to my Discord, Twitch, and Twitter, but for now guys, keep your chin up. Peace.